Right, okay. So in this section, I will actually begin to compare the features of Vim and Emacs, bearing in mind the default features. Therefore, if you have customized Vim and Emacs beyond recognition, this section probably won't apply to you that much. I will also be comparing them based on several aspects or contexts in much the same way as I did in the philosophy and approach section. With that being said, I think now we can jump right in. So, the first aspect or context that I want to look at Vim and Emacs through is that of your workflow or the assumed workflow of Vim. We touched on this a bit within the philosophy and approach section. So hopefully this should be ringing some bells. Anyway, Vim has primarily a terminal-based workflow. In other words, you typically by default are expected to go from the terminal into Vim to edit text and then back again to do all the other stuff you might want to do. And again, with the exception of customization, because you can add a lot of features to Vim and therefore not have to go out of Vim in order to access these features if you wanted to, right? Emacs, on the other hand, expects you to use it as a launchpad to do pretty much all the jobs you want to do. Therefore, you are expected to jump from Emacs buffer to Emacs buffer instead of jumping in and out of the terminal where you called Emacs from. This applies to whether you start Emacs in the terminal or the GUI, really, because it just expects you to stay within it, right? To access all the kind of development environment features that you might want from within it. That's the primary difference between the assumed workflows of Vim and Emacs. Therefore, if you prefer to keep each of your software development tools distinctly separate by invoking them separately from the terminal, Vim by default might be what you want, right? However, if you want something a bit more cohesive where all your tools are contained within this single universal environment, then maybe Emacs by default is what you want, right? Because Emacs offers that universal interface for all of your tools and therefore offers a universal interface for customization as well. So that's the workflow aspect of Vim and Emacs. Next, we have extensibility. So Vim uses VimScript as a dedicated language for Vim plugins. Emacs, on the other hand, uses Emacs Lisp or eLisp for its language of extensibility. With Vim, however, VimScript is a dedicated language only for writing Vim plugins. So it's a lot more of a specific language, even though it is technically, I think, a fully fledged programming language. Therefore, you kind of have to go out of your way to learn it, which is a bit of a disadvantage, I would say. But that's only if you want to write plugins in Vim, right? Most of the time, you will be just using someone else's plugins, and so it's not going to be too much of an issue there. Emacs uses eLisp, which is a sibling of Common Lisp. Therefore, if you know Common Lisp, you will probably know like 90% of Emacs Lisp. But also, with Emacs, because all of its base features are basically eLisp as well, there is no real distinction between external so-called packages and default or internal sort of functions, right? So what that means is, whether you're accessing a default inbuilt function within Emacs, or you're accessing some kind of external package feature, from the perspective of Emacs, you're just evaluating Lisp, or rather, it is just evaluating Lisp. There is no distinction, really. It's just more Lisp for eLisp. No, it's just more Lisp for Emacs to interpret. Therefore, you may find that the extensibility within Emacs, the way in which you customize it, is a lot more streamlined because Emacs has a far more integrated extensibility or extensible interface because of the way it treats eLisp and the way it evaluates it. Under the hood, Emacs is really just an eLisp interpreter. It just interprets eLisp. That's it. So therefore, when you're adding packages to Emacs with eLisp, it's just doing its job. It's just evaluating eLisp macros and functions. This is like one of the ways in which I want to highlight the prime difference between the goals of Vim and Emacs. Again, I touched on this before in the philosophy and approach section, but Emacs really aims to be just a macro environment, an extensible macros environment. Vim, however, more specifically aims to be a good text editor, a modal text editor with good default key bindings, which I think it very much succeeds within. But Emacs, therefore, has a lot more of a streamlined approach, I think, to extensibility. Good, so that's the extensibility aspect of Vim and Emacs. But if you're not wanting to customize your editor a lot, then I would say Vim with VimScript is perfectly fine, right? VimScript, for all the like criticism I may have mentioned about it, it still works. It's still very powerful. It's still hugely used as a language to write Vim plugins, right? It's still good. But it does, I think, have a couple of disadvantages compared to the way Emacs handles this extensibility aspect. But yeah, I don't really stress customizing my editing or editor environment, so therefore I'm happy with using Vim, and I don't really use VimScript anyway, so like it's not a problem for me. So if it's not a problem for you, then Vim and VimScript still is a viable option, right? If extensibility is not something you care about. But if it is, then I would say Emacs wins in this aspect. Portability now. So Vim is ultimately a smaller program than Emacs, and it is also added to essentially all Unix/Linux machines, at least in the form of its predecessor VI. Okay, Emacs, however, is not. Looking at the history, this may be more of a history thing than simply the fact that Vim is smaller. In modern terms, Emacs and Vim are both incredibly small in terms of their program size. But in history terms, I would say because Vim and VI both come from the background of a Unix environment or a Unix sort of development community. There we go, community. I think that's probably why it is contained mostly, or within most Unix and Linux machines. But because Emacs originally was because Emacs was originally developed in the context of the MIT AI Lab community, therefore, I don't think it had that strong foothold in the Unix environment sort of community, right? So that's probably more as to why Emacs is not included within Unix or Linux machines by default. I don't really think it's this whole argument about Vim is smaller, therefore it's easier to add. It's like Emacs is fairly small as well, especially today, and so that shouldn't be the issue. Maybe it was back in the day, right? Maybe it was an issue back in the day. So maybe there is some truth to that. But anyway, if your work involves accessing a lot of different Unix/Linux machines, you will probably only have Vim or VI at your disposal. Therefore, learning either Vim or VI becomes more important, and therefore getting used to using them becomes more important, and therefore using them as your main text editor might be more beneficial to you. But that being said, it depends on your work, right? There are probably only specific kinds of work on servers and things like that where you will not be able to add Emacs onto that server and that sort of thing. So again, just depends on your work. But portability, if that's an issue for you, then Vim or VI would be the better option, or at least, in the context of learning Vim and VI, right? It will be good to learn at least Vim and VI. But at home, you can still use Emacs, right? So that's the caveat. But yeah, this is the aspect of portability. Okay. Next, we have default key bindings. This is, by and large, the main sort of aspect in which Vim and Emacs are compared. But I would like you, by the end of this slide, to appreciate that the lines are actually a bit blurry, okay? So, first of all, by default, Vim key bindings are modal and Emacs key bindings are modeless. Therefore, if you prefer the modal way of doing things, Vim by default might be the way you want to go. If you prefer the modeless sort of scheme of key bindings by default, then Emacs would be the way to go for you. Now, there is the caveat that within Emacs, because of the ways you can customize it, you can change the way the key bindings, the default key bindings are, but I'll get onto that at the end of this slide. Okay, but by default, with default behavior, if you don't want to customize Vim or Emacs that much, then by default, one or the other, based on the fact that they are modal or modeless key bindings, one of them will be what you want to look out for, right? So if you find that you're more efficient in one scheme or the other, that's where you would pick Vim or Emacs. Now, with Emacs key bindings, a lot of criticism has been made about the fact that you're having to contort your hand, like use your pinky a lot to access Control, Alt, or Meta, and Shift, right? There's all of this stretching or contorting of your hand that goes on. And the criticism made is that you will get what is called Emacs pinky. This is a lie. Unless your keyboard is so unergonomical that you really do have to bend your hand that much, and you've been using Emacs with its default key bindings and not remapping the keys for like 50 years, right? Maybe you will get some sort of pain in your pinky finger. But the bottom line is, even if this is an issue for you, you can remap caps lock to Control, for example. You can put your left Alt key onto the right hand side by remapping Alt greater, okay? So you have options because you want to use key bindings in the most efficient way possible. Anyway, it just makes sense to do this. And that's what I do. I've remapped caps lock to Control. And so when I use Emacs, it's very nice and easy. I don't have to stretch my pinky to the bottom left. And I've also remapped my Alt greater on the right to Alt. Therefore, I can use the right-hand side or the left-hand side to access Control or Alt, right? So then I can do things like Alt F by pressing Alt with my right hand and F on my left hand, and just means I'm effectively and efficiently using my hands. That's what you want to do anyway with key bindings. So yeah, it's not a big issue if you can, get around it in this way. Likewise with Vim, escape might be a bit of an awkward button to press because it's in the top left. So you can remap that button on your keyboard, as I haven't done that here, to caps lock if you want to, but by default, Vim offers alternatives. You can press Control C or Control Open Square Brace to access the same functionality of escape. Control Open Square Brace requires you to use two hands, but Control C just needs the left hand, so that might be preferable, whichever one. But in either case, it should be easier to access than the escape button because your hands stay on that home row, which is all ever so important. So that's the case with Vim key bindings. I will stress, however, that whichever key binding scheme you are using, whichever one you're used to, it will be fast purely if you're used to it. I would say there is no absolute answer. Vim key bindings can be more efficient maybe in programming purely because of the idea of text objects, but you can add that functionality into Emacs because of the way you can extend its macros. And there may be macros in Emacs already there for you to use, but you just have to map a key binding to them, right? So yeah, it gets blurry in that aspect even. But yeah, I would say the bottom line is just get used to one key binding scheme. Just get used to one, and you should be good. You should be just as fast as the other guy who uses the other text editor, right? So it shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be an issue, especially if you use all of these, what do you call them? Not shortcuts, but use these tools of like rebinding keys to suit you, then it should be all the more or less of an issue. The other thing I want to add, especially about Emacs, is that by default in the terminal, GNU readline, which is the GNU utility to take user input that is used in the terminal, that is used in your bash terminal by default, it uses Emacs key bindings by default. So if I type a command like ls, I don't know, oh blimey, I can't type, documents, there we go. If I type a command like that, I can go to the beginning of the line with Control A. I can go to the end of the line with Control E. I can go back a word with Alt B. I can go forward a word with Alt F. I can delete the previous word with Alt backspace. I can retype the word by, well, retyping it. If I do that, here we go. And I can go to the beginning of the line and doing Control K and then yanking it from the kill ring that it is now in by doing Control Y, right? And I think when I do Alt backspace and press Control Y, it replaces that text because by doing Alt backspace, I am adding this text to the kill ring or killing it to the kill ring. Yeah, good. So those are all the standard sort of Emacs key bindings. They're there by default in the bash terminal. So if that matters, maybe learning Emacs key bindings would be beneficial to you. And the fact is, you can, edit the default key bindings that GNU readline uses. Therefore, you can have normal and insert mode in the Vim sort of way in the terminal. Instead of having the Control A and E like key bindings, you can have 0 and $sign in the terminal and then have to press I to go into insert mode to type your command. I did this for a while with GNU readline. You just have to edit, I think it was, oh, blimey, it was just a config file. I think in my home directory I had to edit, if not just my bash rc or profile configuration. So yeah, it's very easily changeable, but I found when I used the Vim key bindings in the terminal that because most commands are short, the frequency with which you have to change modes is quite high. And I found that to be just a bit of a pain. So therefore, having a modeless key bindings like Emacs ones was more beneficial to me. It was quicker for me because the commands I tend to input are quite small. Yeah, it just made sense. So yeah, that's that aspect of GNU readline. Next, we have the fact that Emacs or GNU Emacs assumes that you may want to play around with key bindings. Because of the way Emacs was developed as just an environment for macros, it does not assume that you want to use the default key bindings. It allows you to interface with the macros very easily with other key bindings that you want to set. It's just the process of editing your .emacs file to add whatever key bindings you want, right? Furthermore, you can add specific packages to Emacs that already exist to have Vim key bindings within Emacs. So you can have Vim modes in Emacs, for example, using evil mode. You can also use a certain distribution of Emacs, such as Doom Emacs or Space Emacs, that use Vim key bindings by default, but within Emacs. Again, because the way Emacs was built or developed, is just the idea of having extensible macros. But the way Vim was developed was as this modal text editor specifically. So therefore with Emacs, you can change the key bindings to whatever you want, and in fact that is more or less encouraged. That is the way Emacs assumes you are going to use it. So with that now being said, I hope you can appreciate now that the lines are a bit blurred when it comes to comparing default key bindings with Vim and Emacs, because not only can you remap keys to make the experience a lot smoother whether you're using Vim or Emacs, but you can also then appreciate where Emacs key bindings might be used elsewhere, and appreciate the fact that Emacs does not assume that you will not change these key bindings. And also there's the fact actually that with a lot of applications like VS Code, you have Vim plugins, and these Vim plugins are written in a lot of other development environments. And so you'll probably find more Vim plugins than Emacs plugins. I've definitely found that to be the case, where I'm using some software and I look at the settings and it's like, oh, look at that. I can have Vim key bindings here. And that I find is one advantage to learning Vim key bindings because of this kind of portability of key bindings, not so much portability of the program itself. Although with Vim that is worth mentioning because it is used in a lot of machines that have Unix/Linux. Okay, so that's the whole default key binding aspect of Vim and Emacs. I hope you can see that there are benefits and disadvantages to each one, but by and large, there is no absolute answer. They're both as good as each other, but it's more like the Emacs environment that comes into play here at the end because of the way it handles key bindings. Okay. Sorry about that, just had to clear my throat, but of course, as always, you do not need to hear that. Good. Unique tools and packages now. So, unique tools and packages are another aspect of using Vim and Emacs if you want to customize your editing environment, your editing experience. Bottom line is that both Vim and Emacs probably have all of the packages that you're looking for. The scope of packages and plugins available to you is probably the same in both pieces of software. Okay. But I do find that the ecosystem of Emacs packages tends to be a bit more fleshed out and sophisticated than Vim's. So for example, you have a package called Magit or Magit, depending on the way you want to pronounce it. But this is an Emacs package that handles Git in a very seamless sort of way. Again, you have all the Emacs key bindings available to you in this package, right? And so it's a very integrated package to handle all your Git commands and all your Git manipulations, right? Next, we have EMMS. I actually used this. I haven't used Magit. So I must admit I haven't used that. But I have used the next package I want to mention here. That's EMMS. This is the Emacs Multimedia System, I believe it's what it stands for. I used it to play my music at some point because all of my music I just have as MP3 files downloaded from Amazon Music, right? So I can use the EMMS system to play my music, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty good. I mean, I've got no complaints. It worked very well. I don't use it anymore just because I realized I can run VLC in the terminal, but yeah, it's there if you want it. And also you have, I think, one of the main pieces of packages, no, one of the main packages that Emacs is well known for is org mode. And it comes with org agenda. And this mode, or I don't know, set of packages really, it's probably like a meta package. This mode, org mode, standing for organization mode, allows you to use first of all, a very specific kind of markdown syntax, but you can export org mode files, for example, or org files to LaTeX or HTML or ODT formats. You can also have org agenda where You contain your sort of to-do items with timestamps or date stamps, time and date stamps that you can insert easily in org mode, because remember, a mode in Emacs allows you to have added functionality, a layer of functionality within a buffer. So when you open an org file, which is a .org file, you will automatically be launched into org mode, from which you can access very easy functions, such as adding a timestamp or adding a to-do list or adding a table. It's all very good. And so I actually use org agenda here right now in Emacs in order to manage my agenda, my calendar for everything I've got to do. And it is very, very good. It's all just using local.org files, and it's very easy to use. It's literally a bunch of like 4 files. What org agenda allows you to do is view all of these items and, with their timestamps in a chronological way. So it gives you the week, and it gives you all the items you have said you want to do in that week. You can add deadlines, schedule things, and just add plain timestamps. They all have subtle differences. But yeah, it's really, really useful. And it's all from within Vim. My goodness, Emacs, not Vim. So you can use all of these functions without ever having to go out of Emacs. So it's really good. It's a really good ecosystem of packages that Emacs has. Now, bearing in mind, when I say this, I don't have a lot of experience with Vim plugins, just because I don't tend to use a lot of Vim plugins. Well, I don't really use any, in fact, at least yet. I don't see the benefit for me to use any plugins in Vim. I just would rather go out in the terminal and do whatever it is I want to do there. So I don't have a lot of experience with Vim, therefore that's maybe why I can easily say that Emacs has this better ecosystem. So I may be a bit biased there, but I do think it does. I do think Emacs provides a lot more of a cohesive experience of package management and package usage, really. Therefore, if you need an integrated GUI as well in your development workflow to display images and work with all these packages in a very seamless way with a universal environment, then I think hands down Emacs offers a better experience than Vim, because that's what Emacs was meant to do from the beginning. But I don't think that's the case with Vim, because Vim is ultimately a clone of VI with improvements, and VI was never meant to be this universal development environment. It was just meant to be a visual text editor. So yeah, again, this all goes back to the history, which I think is very important to understand. Cool, so that's the unique tools and packages aspect here. Next, in the end, really, by going through all those aspects, I think you will benefit from learning both of these tools. Whether you find any of these aspects being very pivotal for you, very important to you, and therefore you have strong opinions about which editor you want to use, I think even then you will benefit from just learning both of these tools, because the bottom line is you will probably have to use one of them in one context and one of them in another context, right? Or at least it pays off to know what each editor is capable of, so that if you're ever in an experience or ever in a situation where you have to use one, you are comfortable in doing so. So I would just recommend learning both of these editors to a basic level, and it also gives you a better idea to compare them when you compare them yourself, right? Because if ultimately you're kind of struggling to find which one you want to use, then just learn each one to a basic level and you'll have a better idea of what the capabilities are in each of them. And then once you have found your preferred workflow, then you can focus on one editor, right? Then you can be like, oh, okay, I've tried Vim, I've tried Emacs, but I like this one better. then you can just focus on that one and learn it in a lot more detail. But yeah, really, it's just about your global workflow. If in the end you are good at working with Vim or Emacs in the context of your whole work, your whole workflow, your global workflow, then that's good. Then that's just good. You are using the best tool for the job in your situation. That is the bottom line. So I don't want to hear anything about, look, the Emacs key bindings, they're trash. You want to use modes. I don't want to hear about Emacs Pinky. I don't want to hear about any other sort of, I think, strawman criticism of these programs. Because ultimately, if you can work well using any of these programs, then you're a good engineer. You're a good worker, right? That is the bottom line. But I hope that by looking at these aspects of Vim and Emacs, you can have a better understanding from which you can compare both of them. Okay, so that's it really for this section. And I think the bottom line of the comparison is if you're using one of these programs and you've tried to learn both, which is not an easy job, I think that's really good if you can learn both. It takes a lot of effort, but it's effort well spent. I think if you've done that, you're in a good position to just focus on one, and if you find it's good for you, then it's good for you in your global workflow. That's the bottom line. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you join me for the next section.